Artemis 2, launching in winter 2026.
7. RS-25 engines lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff. The crew of Artemis 2 now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
4 astronauts, a spacecraft built by the lowest bidder, and 400,000 kilometers of absolute nothing standing between them and home. On November 2024, Artemis 2 launched from Kennedy Space Center. The world watched, the cameras rolled. NASA declared it a triumph of human engineering. But here is what they didn't show you in the press conference. The heat shield was already damaged before they left the ground. Not theoretically damaged, actually damaged. During the unmanned Artemis 1 mission, engineers discovered over 100 sections of the heat shield had charred, cracked, and in some cases completely burned away during re-entry. NASA's official response? We've analyzed the data. We understand the problem. It is acceptable risk. Acceptable risk. That is the phrase they use when the alternative is admitting the entire program might be fatally flawed. So they sent 4 human beings back into the void anyway. Let's be very clear about what a heat shield actually does. When you re-enter Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour, you are not just getting a little warm. The friction between the spacecraft and the air molecules generates temperatures exceeding 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That is half the temperature of the surface of the sun. The heat shield doesn't deflect this heat. It ablates. That means it burns away, layer by layer, sacrificing itself so the astronauts inside don't cook alive in a metal coffin. If even a small section fails to ablate correctly, the plasma punches through, and if plasma gets inside the crew cabin, death is not instantaneous. The air inside ignites first, then the wiring, then the seats, then the crew. The Artemis 2 astronauts knew this. Reed Wiseman, the mission commander, is not naive. Victor Glover, the pilot, understands orbital mechanics better than most engineers. Christina Koch holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman. Jeremy Hansen, the Canadian astronaut, has spent years training for exactly this kind of mission. They are not reckless, they are not stupid, but they are trapped in a political machine that cannot afford to delay. After Artemis 1's heat shield damage was discovered, NASA had 2 options. Option 1, redesign the heat shield. Delay the program by 3 to 5 years. Watch Congress threaten to cut funding. Watch China accelerate their lunar program and potentially reach the moon first. Option 2, declare the damage within acceptable parameters. Modify re-entry procedures. Roll the dice. They chose option 2. The plan was simple. Instead of a steep, fast re-entry that would generate maximum heat, Artemis 2 would perform a skip re-entry. The capsule would dip into the upper atmosphere, slow down slightly, then skip back out into space like a stone on water. On the second dip, it would commit to full re-entry at a lower speed and lower temperature. In theory, this would reduce the thermal load on the damaged sections. In theory, but physics doesn't care about theory. The Van Allen radiation belts don't care about public relations. And the moon certainly doesn't care about NASA's budget. Let's talk about what the crew actually faced out there. To reach the moon, Artemis 2 had to punch through the Van Allen belts. These are zones of trapped radiation circling Earth like invisible death rings. The inner belt sits about 1,000 kilometers above the surface. The outer belt stretches from 13,000 to 60,000 kilometers out. Inside these belts, high-energy protons and electrons slam into anything that passes through. The Orion capsule has radiation shielding, but shielding is not a force field. It is layers of aluminum, polyethylene, and water tanks positioned around the crew cabin. It reduces exposure. It does not eliminate it. During the 10-day mission, each astronaut absorbed approximately 5.6 millisieverts of radiation. That is roughly equivalent to 30 chest X-rays. Not immediately lethal, but radiation damage is cumulative, and it is unpredictable. Some astronauts develop cataracts years later. Some develop aggressive cancers. Some show no symptoms at all. Russian cosmonaut Valery Polyakov spent 437 days in space and lived to age 80, but we don't have long-term data on what happens when you punch through the Van Allen belts repeatedly. Artemis 2 was a test case. The astronauts volunteered to be that test case. Now, let's discuss the part of the mission nobody talks about. The far side. On day 6, Artemis 2 swung around the far side of the moon for 48 minutes. A 2,000-mile, thick wall of solid rock stood between the crew and every single human being alive. No radio, no communication, no emergency abort. If something went wrong during that window, mission control would not know. The astronauts would be on their own, completely. Michael Collins, the Apollo 11 command module pilot, described this moment as the loneliest feeling in human history. He said the silence was so absolute, it felt like the universe had been erased. Reed Wiseman experienced the exact same thing, floating in a machine held together by welds and rivets, staring out at a black void stretching billions of light years in every direction. During those 48 minutes, the crew had a protocol. Monitor systems, check readouts, prepare for engine ignition. But there is another protocol nobody talks about. The one where you don't look at each other too long, the one where you keep your voice steady on the internal comms. Because if you let the reality sink in, if you truly comprehend that you are more isolated than any human being has ever been, the fear can break you. Christina Koch later described it as the weight of distance. Not physical weight, psychological weight. The crushing awareness that if something goes wrong right now, in this exact moment, no one can help. Not the president, not mission control, not the entire combined resources of human civilization. You are on your own. No rescue mission exists for deep space. If the engine fails to reignite on the far side, the capsule doesn't explode, it just drifts. The crew would orbit the moon until their oxygen ran out. 3 days of air, then nothing. They would die in total silence, knowing Earth continued without them, completely unaware they were gone until the expected communication window passed, and the capsule never reappeared. This is the psychological cost NASA doesn't put in the mission brief. But let's return to the heat shield. On day 10, November 2024, Artemis 2 began its re-entry. The first skip went exactly as planned. The capsule dipped into the atmosphere, heated up, slowed down, then bounced back out into space systems. Normal. Then came the second dip, the final commitment. At this point, there is no abort. There is no second chance. Physics takes over. The capsule slammed into the atmosphere at Mach 32. The heat shield began to ablate. Layers of material burned away as designed, creating a superheated plasma sheath around the spacecraft. Inside the cabin, the astronauts could see the glow through the windows, a roaring, orange inferno inches away from their faces, separated only by a few centimeters of reinforced glass. The temperature outside the heat shield reached 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the cabin, it climbed past 80 degrees. Then 90. The cooling system was fighting a losing battle against the physics of atmospheric compression. Sweat ran down their faces inside their helmets. Not from fear, from heat. Victor Glover monitored the cabin pressure gauges. The numbers stayed green, but he knew what those numbers meant. If a single seal failed, if one gasket gave way under the thermal stress, the cabin would depressurize in seconds. And at 6 Gs of deceleration, you can't reach across the cabin to close an emergency valve. You can barely lift your arm, the G-forces built. 4 Gs, 5. Peak deceleration hit 6 Gs. That means every astronaut's body suddenly weighed 6 times its normal mass. Breathing becomes difficult. Vision narrows. If you pass out, you just have to wait until it is over. The radio went dead. This is expected. The plasma sheath is so dense, it blocks all radio frequencies. Mission control lost contact. For 4.5 minutes, they stared at blank screens, waiting to see if the heat shield would hold. If it held, the capsule would punch through the plasma, the parachutes would deploy, and the radio signal would return. If it didn't hold, the silence would just continue. No explosion, no distress call, just silence. 4.5 minutes is not a long time, but when you are waiting to find out if 4 people just burned alive in a metal box falling from space, it feels like hours. Finally, the radio crackled. Orion, Houston, we have you on comm. The heat shield held, the parachutes deployed, the capsule splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, and the crew was recovered safely. NASA called it a complete success. But here is what they didn't say in the press release. Post-flight inspection revealed the heat shield had sustained even more damage than Artemis 1. Over 300 sections showed charring beyond predicted models. Several areas had burned down to within millimeters of the underlying structure. Millimeters. The inspection team found something else, cracks. Hairline fractures running through sections of the ablative material that hadn't even burned away yet. Stress fractures from the thermal cycling. Heat, cold, heat, cold, 5,000 degrees on one side, minus 250 degrees in shadow on the other. The material was being torn apart by temperature differentials that no ground test could fully replicate. In one section near the crew cabin, engineers discovered the heat shield had delaminated. The outer layer had separated from the inner structure, not completely, but enough. If that delamination had propagated during re-entry, if it had peeled back even a few more centimeters, the superheated plasma would have found a way in through the gap. The crew was sitting 3 inches away from a structural failure they never knew existed. If re-entry had lasted 30 seconds longer, or if the angle had been slightly steeper, the outcome could have been catastrophic, NASA's official statement. The data has been invaluable. We will apply lessons learned to future missions. Translation: we got lucky. Artemis 3 is currently scheduled for 2026. That mission won't just fly around the moon, it will land on it. The lunar South Pole, a region of permanent shadow, where temperatures drop to minus 400 degrees Fahrenheit, where the terrain is unknown, where no human has ever set foot, and they'll be using the same heat shield design with modifications, because redesigning it from scratch would delay the program. And delay is unacceptable. This is not a criticism of the astronauts. They are among the most capable, intelligent, and courageous people alive. This is a reminder of what space travel actually is. It is not a triumph of engineering. It is a controlled disaster that occasionally doesn't kill everyone involved. Every successful mission is just a very elaborate bet against physics, and the house always wins eventually. We celebrate the victories, we build monuments to the heroes, but we forget that the only reason we call them heroes is because the alternative was dying alone in the dark, 250,000 miles from home, in a broken machine that nobody could reach. Artemis 2 succeeded. 4 astronauts returned safely. The mission is being hailed as a milestone in human space exploration. But the heat shield is still damaged, the radiation belts are still lethal, and the far side of the moon is still the loneliest place a human being can go. We didn't conquer space, we survived it for now. And that is the terrifying truth they didn't tell you.